The Zenith Galactic Academy floated in the void between three star systems, its crystalline structure catching the light of distant suns like a jewel suspended in space. For over 2,000 years, it had served as the premier educational institution for the galaxy's most promising young minds. Students from hundreds of species walked its gleaming corridors, their differences celebrated as strengths that would one day unite the cosmos in peaceful cooperation. Kethvar had never wanted to be here. The massive Vorthak stood nearly 3 meters tall, his midnight black carapace scarred from countless hunts on his homeworld. 6 powerful limbs moved with predatory grace as he stalked through the Academy's halls, yellow eyes scanning for any sign of weakness or threat. Every instinct in his body screamed that this place was wrong. Too bright, too clean, too safe. His people were apex predators, evolved from creatures that had hunted in the perpetual twilight of Vorthak Prime's dense jungles. They understood strength, hierarchy, and the simple truth that only the strong survived. This academy, with its philosophy of cooperation and understanding, felt like an elaborate trap designed to weaken the young. Kethvar's attendance wasn't voluntary. The Galactic Council had made it clear that if the Vorthak Dominion wanted to maintain their trading rights and territorial claims, they needed to demonstrate their commitment to galactic unity. That meant sending their brightest youth to learn alongside other species, to prove they could coexist peacefully with the galaxy's herbivorous majority. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, a born hunter, was being forced to sit in classrooms with creatures his ancestors would have considered prey. His first few days had been a careful dance of restraint. Other students gave him wide berths in the corridors, their various forms of primitive fear responses triggering whenever he passed. The bird-like Zephyrians would ruffle their feathers nervously. The insectoid Chithari would emit low warning clicks. Even the proud Centaurian horse beings would stamp their hooves and shy away. It was natural. It was right. Kethvar took a grim satisfaction in knowing that despite millennia of civilization, prey species still recognized a true predator when they saw one. His dormitory assignment reflected this reality. While most students shared rooms with compatible species, Kethvar had been given private quarters in a wing of the academy reserved for special circumstances. The administration had been polite but firm. For everyone's safety and comfort, some students required additional space and privacy. The isolation suited him. He had no desire to pretend friendship with beings he was evolutionarily designed to hunt. Better to maintain the natural order, even here in this sterile monument to impossible idealism. 3 weeks into his mandatory enrollment, Kethvar's carefully maintained equilibrium was shattered. He had been returning from a particularly tedious lecture on interspecies communication and cultural sensitivity when he heard something that made every predatory instinct in his body surge to full alert. Somewhere ahead, carried on the Academy's recycled air currents, came the sound of distress. Not the typical squeaking or chirping of startled prey species. This was different. Higher-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound that triggered ancient hunting responses buried deep in his genetic memory. Kethvar moved toward the sound with fluid silence, his 6 limbs carrying him forward in a low prowl that his professors would undoubtedly disapprove of. Academic decorum demanded that he walk upright in the humanoid fashion preferred by most species, but instinct overrode etiquette. The distress calls were coming from one of the Academy's recreational gardens, vast hydroponics bays that provided both fresh air and psychological comfort for students accustomed to natural environments. As Kethvar approached the entrance, he could smell something else mixed with the usual plant scents and recycled atmosphere. Terror. Pure, primal terror. He rounded the corner and froze. 2 young creatures, no larger than his forearm, were backed against the trunk of a massive earth oak tree. They looked like miniature versions of himself, black carapaces gleaming, for small limbs trembling, large yellow eyes wide with panic. But where adult Vorthak stood proud and dangerous, these tiny beings radiated vulnerability. Vorthak cubs. Somehow, impossibly, there were Vorthak cubs aboard the Academy. Kethvar's mind reeled. The Dominion would never send younglings to an institution like this. Cubs remained on the homeworld until they reached hunting age, learning the ancient ways from their clan elders. These 2 couldn't be more than 3 standard years old. barely past the stage where they could walk upright. His confusion deepened as he took in the scene before him. Standing between the cubs and a group of older students was something Kethvar had only heard about in cultural briefings, a human. The creature was smaller than Kethvar, but larger than the cubs, covered in the pale pink skin typical of its species. Unlike most academy students, it wore simple, practical clothing rather than the decorative garments favored by herbivorous species. Its stance was protective, arms spread wide to shield the cubs behind it. "Stay back," the human was saying, its voice steady despite the obvious danger. "They're just scared. Don't make any sudden movements." The students advancing on them were all larger species, two Brutarian rock crushers whose massive frames could pulverize bones, and a tentacled Nethrin whose acidic secretions could dissolve flesh. All herbivores by nature, but their size and natural weapons made them formidable when threatened or angry. "Those are dangerous predator spawn," one of the Brutarians rumbled, its voice like grinding stone. "They've been stealing food from the communal dining areas. They attacked a Zephyrian student yesterday." "They're children," the human replied firmly. "They're hungry and frightened. Of course they're acting out." Kethvar's predatory assessment kicked in automatically. The human stood no real chance against three larger opponents. Its species was notoriously fragile. No natural weapons, no protective shell, no venomous secretions. Just soft flesh and an apparent willingness to throw itself between danger and the cubs it was protecting. The Nethrin's tentacles writhed with increasing agitation. "Predator spawn don't belong here. This is a place of learning and peace. They need to be contained until their handlers can remove them." "No one is containing anyone," the human said, and Kethvar was surprised by the steel in its voice. "These children aren't property. They're students, just like all of us." "Students?" Kethvar's mind struggled to process this information. Cubs didn't attend academic institutions. They learned through practice, through hunting, through the ancient trials that had shaped Vorthak society for millions of years. The idea of formal education for younglings was as alien to his people as the concept of prey species developing civilization. The confrontation escalated rapidly. The Brutarian took a heavy step forward, its rocky hide grinding audibly. "Stand aside, Softskin. This doesn't concern your kind." The human didn't move. If anything, it shifted into a more protective stance, and Kethvar found himself oddly impressed by the creature's courage, however futile it might be. "Everything that happens to students concerns me," the human said. "That's what being part of a community means." Community, another concept that sat uneasily in Kethvar's worldview. Vorthak understood pack bonds, clan loyalty, and dominance hierarchies. But this broader idea of mutual obligation to unrelated individuals from different species was as foreign to him as quantum physics would be to a primitive hunter. Yet as he watched the human maintain its protective stance, something stirred in his chest. A recognition, perhaps, not of the sentiment itself, but of the underlying courage required to act on it. The Brutarian raised one massive fist, and Kethvar found himself moving without conscious decision. His emergence from the garden's shadows was silent and sudden. One moment the space was occupied by three aggressive herbivores and one defiant human. The next, a 3-meter nightmare of black carapace and predatory intent had materialized behind the would-be aggressors. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Nethrin's tentacles snapped to attention, chemical fear sense flooding the air. The Brutarians turned with the ponderous inevitability of geological formations, their small eyes widening as they processed what they were seeing. Kethvar didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone communicated everything necessary, that the cubs were under his protection, that any threat to them would be met with overwhelming force, and that the natural order of predator and prey was about to be violently reasserted if the situation didn't change immediately. The three larger students backed away with admirable speed for their size. Within moments, the garden was empty except for Kethvar, the human, and the two trembling cubs. The human turned to face him, and Kethvar was struck by the lack of fear in its expression. Wariness, yes. Uncertainty, certainly. But no trace of the panic response he triggered in most prey species. "Thank you," the human said simply. Kethvar studied the creature more carefully. It was young, probably close to his own age and relative development, with the brown skin and dark hair common to many human populations. Its clothing was practical and well-maintained, suggesting discipline and self-sufficiency. But what struck him most was its eyes, intelligent, compassionate, and utterly without the predatory gleam he was accustomed to seeing in his own kind. "Why?" Kethvar asked, his voice a low rumble that made the cubs flinch behind the human's legs. "Why protect them?" The human blinked, apparently surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I? They're kids. They needed help." Such a simple answer. Such an alien concept. Kethvar approached slowly, careful to keep his movements non-threatening. The cubs pressed closer to their protector, tiny claws gripping the human's clothing. As he drew near, he could see details that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. They were young, so very young. Their carapaces still held the soft sheen of childhood, not yet hardened into the armor-like shell of adult Vorthak. Their eyes were too large for their faces, a juvenile characteristic that triggered protective instincts even in a species not known for parental devotion. And they were thin, too thin. Someone hadn't been feeding them properly. "What are your names?" Kethvar asked, dropping into the ritual crouch that Vorthak adults used when addressing cubs. It was a gesture of respect and protection, one that made the youngling's fear scent fade slightly. "Zixtai," whispered the smaller one, a female. "This is my clutch brother, More Death." Traditional names from the old hunting clans. Kethvar felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. These weren't random orphans. They were highborn, possibly descendants of clan leaders. But that only made their presence here more mysterious. The human, who had been watching this interaction with obvious interest, stepped forward carefully. "I'm Sarah Chun. I've been trying to look after them since they arrived, but I don't really know what they need." Kethvar looked at this Sarah Chun with new understanding. Not only had she protected the cubs from immediate danger, but she had been caring for them. A prey species, nurturing young predators. The very concept should have been impossible. "How long have they been here?" he asked. 3 days. They just appeared in the dining hall. No escort, no paperwork, no explanation. The administration is trying to figure out who sent them and why. But in the meantime, Sarah shrugged. Someone had to make sure they were okay. 3 days. 3 days of fear and confusion for cubs who should have been safe in their natal clan's territory. 3 days of relying on the kindness of a creature their every instinct told them to fear. Kethvar made a decision that would have horrified his clan elders. "I will take responsibility for them," he announced. Sarah looked surprised but pleased. "That's wonderful. They need someone who understands their needs, their culture. I've been trying, but..." "You have done well," Kethvar said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "Better than well. You have shown honor." Honor was not a concept Vorthak typically associated with prey species. Honor required strength, courage, the willingness to face danger for principles greater than immediate survival. Yet this soft, vulnerable human had demonstrated all of these qualities in protecting cubs that weren't even her species. Sarah smiled, and Kethvar found himself studying the expression with scientific interest. Human facial displays were reportedly crucial to their communication, but he had never paid much attention to the subtle variations. This particular arrangement of features, lifted corners of the mouth, slight crinkling around the eyes, conveyed warmth and satisfaction that seemed genuine. "I'm glad they'll have someone who can really help them," she said. "But could I still visit sometimes? I've gotten a bit attached." Attached. Another alien concept. Vorthak formed bonds based on utility, dominance, or blood relationship. This idea of emotional connection to unrelated individuals was as foreign as the Academy's philosophy of universal cooperation. Yet as he watched Sarah crouch down to speak gently to the cubs, Kethvar found himself reconsidering certain assumptions about prey species behavior. "You may visit," he heard himself saying. "They have grown accustomed to your presence." It was as close as he could come to acknowledging what he had witnessed. The cubs trusted this human in a way that should have been impossible. They had accepted protection from a creature that every instinct should have labeled as potential prey. Either his understanding of natural law was flawed, or something unprecedented was happening aboard the Zenith Galactic Academy. As they prepared to leave the garden, Kethvar would escort the cubs to his private quarters where they would be safe. He caught Sarah watching him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. "What?" he asked. "I was just thinking," she said slowly, "that maybe the Academy's philosophy isn't as impossible as everyone assumes. Predator and prey working together to protect children. If we can do that, maybe we can figure out how to coexist after all." Kethvar didn't reply. The suggestion was too radical, too contrary to everything he had been taught about the nature of existence. Predators hunted, prey fled or died. These were the fundamental laws that governed all life. But, as he watched the cubs take hesitant steps toward him, their small hands reaching out to grasp his larger claws in trust, he found himself wondering if perhaps the universe was more complex than his people had ever imagined. The first day of an impossible education was about to begin. The next morning brought challenges Kethvar had never imagined facing. Cubs, he discovered, were far more complicated than the straightforward adult relationships he understood. They required constant attention, regular feeding, emotional reassurance, and, apparently, an endless stream of questions about everything they encountered. "Why do the walls shine?" Zixtai asked for the 7th time as they made their way to the dining hall. "Like crystals embedded in the metal," Kethvar replied with practiced patience. "But why do they want the walls to shine?" Mordeath chimed in, his larger frame keeping pace with his clutch sister's shorter legs. "So beings can see where they are going. But why can't they see in the dark like us?" "Because most species evolved on worlds with bright stars. They require additional illumination to navigate safely." "But why?" "Cubs," Kethvar interrupted gently. "Save your questions for the learning spaces. We must focus on food now." The dining hall was a vast circular chamber with seating areas designed for dozens of different body types. Long tables accommodated species who ate communally, while private booths served those who preferred solitude. Feeding stations offered everything from raw meat to complex hydroponic nutrients to pure energy absorption chambers for the few crystalline species. Kethvar had always eaten alone, taking his meals from the predator-specific stations that provided the high-protein sustenance his metabolism required. But, with cubs in tow, the dynamics changed completely. "I want to sit with Sarah," Zixtai announced as soon as they entered the hall. Kethvar scanned the space and spotted the human at a table near the viewing ports, where Earth's blue-white star provided natural lighting. She was sharing the space with several other beings, a mix of species that he would never have expected to see cooperating. "Very well," he said, though something in his chest felt tight with anxiety. Taking the cubs into a social situation felt like stepping into a minefield. Too many variables, too many potential threats, too many opportunities for misunderstanding. As they approached Sarah's table, Kethvar cataloged the other occupants with automatic predatory assessment. A Zephyrian adolescent with bronze-colored feathers, nervous system, quick reflexes, flight-capable. A young Centaurian with the deep purple coat of the mountain clans, powerful legs, herd mentality, likely to panic if startled. 2 Chithari siblings communicating in rapid clicks, exoskeletal armor, chemical weapons, coordinated pack behavior. All prey species. All potentially dangerous if provoked. All now staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed alarm. Sarah looked up as they approached, her face brightening with that same warm expression he had observed the day before. "Kethvar, how did the night go?" "They slept well once they felt secure," he replied, settling carefully onto a bench designed for larger species. The cubs immediately positioned themselves between him and Sarah, apparently having decided that proximity to both provided optimal safety. The Zephyrian, a female named Lyra, according to her name badge, ruffled her feathers nervously. Are they really Vorthak young?" "We are cubs," Mordeath announced proudly, puffing out his small chest. "I am Mordeath of the High Cliff clan, and this is my clutch sister Zixtai." High Cliff clan. Kethvar's attention sharpened. He knew that name, one of the oldest and most prestigious hunting clans on Vorthak Prime. If these cubs were truly from that lineage, their presence at the academy represented something far more significant than a simple educational exchange. "Wow," breathed the younger Chithari, her translated voice carrying tones of fascination. "I've never met predator cubs before. Do you really hunt from birth?" Zixtai giggled, a sound that seemed to surprise everyone at the table. No, silly. We learn to hunt by playing games. Wanna see? Before HFY could intervene, the small female had dropped into a classic stalking crouch and began creeping toward the Chithari with exaggerated stealth. Her movements were pure instinct, fluid, silent, perfectly balanced. Even at her young age, the predatory grace of her species was unmistakable. The Chithari's reaction was immediate and alarming. Both siblings reared back, mandibles clicking in distress, chemical alarm scents flooding the immediate area. Around the dining hall, other students began turning to stare at the source of the disturbance. HFY moved to defuse the situation, but Sarah was faster. "Zixtai," she said calmly. "Remember what we talked about yesterday? Some games that are fun for one person might be scary for others." The cub stopped mid-stalk, her large eyes widening with understanding. "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that not everyone likes hunting games." She straightened and approached the still nervous Chithari with careful, non-threatening movements. "I didn't mean to frighten you. We play different kinds of games on my homeworld." The elder Chithari sibling, Kextar, slowly relaxed his defensive posture. "Different how?" "Well," Zixtai began, settling cross-legged on the floor with the unconscious flexibility of childhood. "On Vorthack Prime, cubs learn by pretending to hunt. But we never hurt anyone during practice. The grown-ups taught us that hunting is serious, so practice must be respectful." HFY found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about cub education. In his own youth, hunting games had been competitive and often brutal, a way of establishing dominance and weeding out weakness. The idea of respectful practice was entirely foreign to his experience. Mordeth joined his sister on the floor, apparently deciding that floor-level conversation was preferable to the elevated table. "What games do your people play?" The question sparked an animated discussion as the various young beings began describing the recreational activities of their homeworlds. HFY listened with growing amazement as patterns emerged. The Zephyrians played complex aerial games that required cooperation and split-second timing. The Centaurians engaged in elaborate herd coordination exercises that looked remarkably similar to military formations. Even the peaceful Chithari had competitive activities, problem-solving challenges that required both individual intelligence and group coordination. Every species, it seemed, used play to teach crucial survival skills. The only difference was that some focused on cooperation while others emphasized competition. "What about humans?" Zixtai asked Sarah. "What games do your cubs play?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "We play all kinds of games. Some are competitive, some are cooperative. Some are physical, some are mental. I think human children are unusual because we play games that prepare us for many different situations." "Like what?" Mordeth prompted. "Well, we have games where one person hides and others seek. Games where teams compete against each other. Games where everyone has to work together to solve a puzzle. Games where we pretend to be different people or creatures." Sarah smiled. "We even have games where we pretend to hunt, though we don't usually hunt for food anymore." HFY felt something shift in his understanding. Humans, according to the cultural briefings he had received, were omnivores with a history of both predation and agriculture. They had evolved as persistence hunters, not apex predators like his own people, but successful ones nonetheless. Yet they had developed cooperative behaviors that allowed them to build complex societies. Perhaps they were a bridge species, something between the pure predator-slash-prey divide that had always seemed absolute. The conversation continued through breakfast, with the cubs asking endless questions about the different species represented at their table. HFY found himself drawn into discussions about Vorthack culture, explaining concepts he had never thought to examine closely. "Do all Vorthack live in clans?" Lyra asked, her earlier nervousness replaced by genuine curiosity. "Yes. The clan provides protection, education, and identity. Without clan membership, a Vorthack cannot truly exist in society." "But what about individualism?" asked Kextar. "Don't you value personal achievement?" The question struck HFY as oddly phrased. Individual achievement serves the clan. The clan's success reflects on its members. They are not separate concepts. Sarah leaned forward with interest. "That's fascinating. Human societies have moved more toward individual achievement, though we still value group success. We've had to learn how to balance both." "How?" More Death asked. Practice, Sarah said simply. Lots and lots of practice. And making lots of mistakes along the way. The cubs absorbed this information with the intense focus that characterized their species. Kethvar could see them processing, comparing this new perspective with everything they had been taught about the natural order. After breakfast, as they prepared to attend their first joint learning session, Zixtai tugged on Kethvar's arm. Kethvar, she whispered, why are prey species so nice? The question hit him like a physical blow. Nice. Such a simple concept, yet one that had never appeared in any of his cultural education. Vorthak understood strength, honor, efficiency, loyalty. But niceness, kindness without purpose, helpfulness without benefit, was as alien as flight. I don't know, he admitted. Perhaps you should ask Sarah. During their first shared class, Introduction to Galactic History, Kethvar found himself observing the social dynamics with new attention. The instructor, an elderly crystalline being whose translucent form glowed with internal light, presented information through a combination of verbal narration and holographic displays. The subject was the formation of the Galactic Council, a topic Kethvar had studied from a Vorthak perspective. But here, surrounded by dozens of different species, the story took on dimensions he had never considered. The First Contact Wars, the instructor intoned, her crystalline voice creating harmonic overtones that made the words seem to resonate from the walls themselves, were characterized not by military conquest, but by fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of intelligence and society. The holographic display showed a star map with conflict zones highlighted in red. Kethvar recognized several systems where Vorthak forces had clashed with early human explorers, though the Academy's version of events emphasized miscommunication rather than the territorial disputes he had learned about. The Terran Federation's approach to first contact protocols proved crucial in establishing peaceful relations, the instructor continued. Rather than assuming hostile intent, human diplomats consistently attempted to find common ground through cultural exchange. A new hologram appeared, humans sitting across negotiation tables from various alien species, their body language open and non-threatening. Kethvar had always assumed such scenes were propaganda, designed to make prey species appear more competent than they actually were. But, watching the historical records unfold, he found himself reconsidering. The humans in these negotiations didn't look like prey. They looked like something else, something he didn't have a word for. Beside him, Zixtai raised her small hand. Instructor Veltar, why did the humans want to make friends with predator species? Weren't they afraid? The question drew attention from across the classroom. Kethvar tensed, expecting the usual platitudes about universal brotherhood that characterized Academy philosophy. But Veltar's response surprised him. Fear and friendship are not mutually exclusive, young one. The humans understood that peaceful coexistence required courage from all parties. They were indeed afraid. Their biological responses are well documented. But they chose cooperation over conflict because they believed the benefits outweighed the risks. But how did they know? More Death asked. How did they know predator species wouldn't just eat them? A ripple of nervous laughter went through the classroom. But Veltar treated the question with complete seriousness. They didn't know. That is what made their choice remarkable. They acted on hope rather than certainty. Hope, another concept that fit uncomfortably in Kethvar's worldview. Vorthak planned, strategized, and relied on strength and skill. Hope implied uncertainty, vulnerability, the possibility of failure. It seemed like a trait that natural selection should have eliminated quickly. Yet humans had used hope to build one of the galaxy's most successful civilizations. During the break between classes, Sarah approached their small group with a suggestion that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. There's a recreational activity session this afternoon, she said. Different species demonstrating their traditional games and sports. Would you like to join? The cubs might enjoy seeing how other cultures play. Kethvar's first instinct was to refuse. Public gatherings meant exposure, vulnerability, potential conflicts with species who viewed Vorthak as natural enemies. But, looking down at the cubs' eager faces, he found his objections dissolving. What would be required of us? He asked. Just participation. Maybe you could show some Vorthak games, if you're comfortable with that. The idea of teaching prey species Vorthak hunting techniques seemed like madness. But The cubs were practically vibrating with excitement, and he found he couldn't disappoint them. Very well, we will attend. The recreational session took place in one of the Academy's largest gathering spaces, a multi-level arena with different zones designed for various physical activities. As they entered, Kethvar was struck by the sheer diversity of the gathering. Zephyrians soared through aerial obstacle courses, while Centaurians galloped through complex ground patterns. Chithari worked together to solve elaborate puzzle structures, while various other species demonstrated everything from musical performances to mathematical games. Where should we start? Sarah asked. Zixtai pointed toward a group of young beings engaged in what appeared to be a strategy game. There, I want to learn that. The game turned out to be a three-dimensional puzzle that required players to cooperate in building a stable structure while competing for the best positions. It was unlike anything from Vorthack culture, which favored direct competition over collaborative challenges. As they joined the group, Kethvar found himself in the unusual position of learning alongside the cubs. The rules were complex, requiring constant communication and compromise between players with very different physical capabilities. Your turn, said a young aquatic being whose translated voice bubbled with enthusiasm. What piece do you want to add? Kethvar studied the growing structure, his mind automatically assessing it for weaknesses and strategic advantages. But the game's design made pure competitive thinking counterproductive. Success required considering what would benefit the entire group, not just his own position. It was frustrating and fascinating, and completely unlike any intellectual challenge he had ever encountered. Beside him, the cubs were adapting with the fluid ease of childhood. They asked questions, offered suggestions, and celebrated other players' successes with genuine enthusiasm. Watching them, Kethvar began to understand something that all his cultural education had missed. Cooperation wasn't a weakness that prey species had developed to compensate for their lack of natural weapons. It was a strength, a way of multiplying individual capabilities through group effort. The Academy wasn't trying to make predators weak. It was teaching them to become something more than they had ever imagined possible. As the afternoon progressed, and the cubs played game after game with increasing confidence, Kethvar found himself in conversation with other supervising adults. Species he would never have spoken to under normal circumstances gradually revealed themselves to be intelligent, thoughtful beings with perspectives that challenged his fundamental assumptions. Your cubs are remarkable, commented a Zephyrian elder whose bronze feathers had faded to silver with age. So curious, so quick to learn new concepts. They adapt well, Kethvar agreed carefully. All young ones do, I think. It's we adults who struggle with change. The elder's head, tilted in what Kethvar had learned, was a gesture of contemplation among her people. I've been teaching here for 40 standard years, and I still discover new ways of thinking about old problems. 40 years. An entire Vorthack generation spent in close contact with other species. The idea was staggering. Are you not concerned about losing your cultural identity? Kethvar asked. The elder's feathers rustled with what he was beginning to recognize as amusement. My dear predator, learning about others doesn't diminish what I am. If anything, it helps me understand my own people better. Perspective is a gift, not a threat. As the session drew to a close, and they prepared to return to their quarters, Zixtai slipped her small hand into his larger claw. Kethvar, she said thoughtfully, I think the Academy is a good place. Why? Because everyone here is trying to learn something new. And learning is the most important kind of hunting. Learning is hunting. It was a metaphor that somehow made perfect sense. And as they walked through the Academy's glowing corridors toward another evening of impossible questions and unlikely friendships, Kethvar began to suspect that the cubs weren't the only ones being educated. The revelation came 3 weeks into their routine, delivered through an encrypted communication that arrived during Kethvar's morning meditation period. He had been practicing the traditional hunting stances, moving through the flowing forms that kept his predatory reflexes sharp, when his personal communicator chimed with an urgent priority code. The message was from clan leader Vextai of the High Cliff clan, Zixtai, and Mordetha's grandsire. The text was brief and coded in the old hunting tongue, but its meaning sent ice through Kethvar's veins. The cubs were sent to die? Guard them well, young hunter. Forces move that would see our future ended before it begins. Kethvar read the message 3 times before its implications fully settled in his mind. The cubs hadn't been sent to the academy as cultural ambassadors or exchange students. They had been sent there to be eliminated, far from home, surrounded by potential enemies, with no clan protection. Someone wanted the High Cliff bloodline ended. The political implications were staggering. High Cliff was one of the most conservative clans on Vorthak Prime, deeply opposed to the growing movement toward galactic integration. If their heirs were murdered while attending an academy program, it would be the perfect excuse to withdraw from all peaceful negotiations and return to the old ways of isolation and aggression. But who would benefit from such an outcome? And how had they managed to place cubs on a transport to the academy without proper documentation or escort? Kethvar's contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of his daily companions. The cubs burst into his quarters with their usual enthusiasm, followed more sedately by Sarah, who had taken to joining them for their morning meal routine. "Kethvar, look what we learned yesterday," Zixtai announced, producing a small device that projected holographic star charts. "Sarah showed us how to read navigation patterns. Did you know there are more than 3 million inhabited systems in our galaxy?" Under normal circumstances, he would have been pleased by their educational progress. Today, every interaction felt fraught with danger. Were there enemies watching them even now? How many of the Academy's 10,000 students and staff might be part of the conspiracy? "That is impressive," he managed, his voice carefully controlled. "Perhaps we should review the information together after breakfast." Sarah caught the subtle change in his tone immediately. Human emotional sensitivity was proving more acute than he had expected. "Is everything all right?" The question presented him with a dilemma. Sarah had proven herself trustworthy, but involving her in clan politics could put her in danger. On the other hand, her position at the academy might provide insights that pure Vorthak thinking could not. "We need to speak privately," he said carefully. "Cubs, why don't you begin your meal preparations? Sarah and I will join you shortly." Once the younglings were occupied in his quarters' small kitchen area, Kethvar led Sarah onto the private balcony that overlooked one of the academy's vast hydroponics bays. The space felt secure enough for honest conversation, and the sound of falling water from the artificial waterfalls would mask their voices from any surveillance devices. "Someone is trying to kill them," he said without preamble. Sarah's reaction was swift and decisive. No shock, no denial, just immediate transition into problem-solving mode. "What do you know?" He showed her the message from clan leader Vextai, translating the ancient hunting dialect into standard galactic. As she read, he watched her face shift through a series of micro-expressions that spoke of rapid mental calculation. "Political assassination," she said when she finished. "Someone wants to trigger a larger conflict by making martyrs of the cubs. You understand the implications quickly. Humans have a long history with this kind of political manipulation." Her voice carried undertones of anger that surprised him. "The question is, who benefits from starting a war between the Vorthak Dominion and the galactic community?" It was the right question, but one with too many potential answers. "There are factions within my own people who oppose integration. Elements in the Galactic Council who fear predator species gaining influence. Criminal organizations who profit from conflict zones. The list is extensive." Sarah began pacing the small balcony, her movements sharp with focused energy. "We need more information, and we need to keep the cubs safe while we get it." She stopped and faced him directly, her expression fierce. "Someone is planning to hurt children under my protection. That makes it my fight." The simple declaration hit him with unexpected force. Not your cubs or those Vorthak younglings, but children under my protection. Sarah had claimed them as her own responsibility, despite having no biological or cultural connection to them. It was the most predatory response he had ever witnessed from a prey species. This could be very dangerous, he warned. If the conspiracy reaches high levels of the Academy administration, anyone investigating could become a target. Then, we'd better be smart about it. Sarah's smile was sharp-edged and entirely lacking in the warmth he was accustomed to seeing. "Fortunately, I know a few things about being smart." Over the next several hours, they developed a strategy that played to their respective strengths. Kethvar would use his predatory senses to identify potential threats and monitor the cubs' safety. Sarah would leverage her connections among the student body to gather information about unusual activities or conversations. The Cubs themselves would continue their normal routines, but with enhanced security protocols disguised as educational opportunities. Instead of wandering freely through the Academy's public spaces, they would be accompanied at all times by either Kethvar or Sarah. Their movement patterns would be varied and unpredictable, making it difficult for potential assassins to establish reliable targeting opportunities. Most importantly, they would not be told about the threat. Cubs that age were incapable of maintaining deceptive behavior for extended periods, and their natural responses to danger could alert enemies to their knowledge of the conspiracy. The first test of their security measures came during the afternoon's cultural exchange session. The Cubs had been looking forward to a presentation about aquatic civilization, but as they entered the large lecture hall, Kethvar's predatory instincts triggered immediate alarm. Too many exit routes were blocked by maintenance equipment that hadn't been there the day before. Several students he didn't recognize were positioned in strategically advantageous locations throughout the space. Most concerning, the normal Academy security presence was notably absent from the area. Change of plans, he murmured to Sarah as they guided the Cubs towards seats near the main entrance. Environmental conditions are suboptimal. Sarah's head turned slightly, her eyes scanning the space with new awareness. I see what you mean. Emergency exit. Gradual withdrawal. Medical excuse. They had rehearsed this scenario. Sarah approached Zixtai and whispered something about feeling unwell, suggesting they return to quarters for rest. The Cub's natural concern for her favorite human made the excuse entirely believable. As they made their way toward the exit, Kethvar's peripheral vision caught movement from 3 different positions in the lecture hall. Large figures, non-student age, moving with the coordinated precision that suggested military training. Faster, he said quietly. They cleared the lecture hall just as the lights dimmed for the beginning of the presentation. Behind them, Kethvar heard the subtle sounds of disappointment. Their targets had escaped the carefully prepared trap. How did you know? Sarah asked as they hurried through the corridors toward the safer territory of the residential wings. Wrong smell, Kethvar explained. Fear scents were too high for a routine academic session, and the maintenance equipment was positioned to channel movement, not facilitate repair work. Maintenance equipment as tactical barriers. That's sophisticated planning. Military sophistication. These are not amateur conspirators. Once they reached the safety of Kethvar's quarters, they conducted a thorough analysis of what they had observed. The assassination attempt, for that's clearly what it had been, revealed several crucial pieces of information. First, the conspirators had access to Academy scheduling and security protocols. They had known exactly where the Cubs would be and when, and they had been able to manipulate the environment without triggering administrative attention. Second, they were using non-student operatives, suggesting resources beyond what a student-based conspiracy could provide. Professional killers or military personnel were involved. Third, they were willing to act in broad daylight in a public space, indicating either desperate urgency or complete confidence in their ability to cover up the crime. We need allies, Sarah said as they finished their analysis. People we can trust absolutely, who have different skill sets than ours. Kethvar nodded reluctantly. His every instinct opposed involving more individuals in clan business, but the complexity of the threat required capabilities he didn't possess. Who do you suggest? Lyra, Sarah said immediately. The Zephyrian from our breakfast group. Her people have the best information-gathering network in the galaxy. They hear everything. And Kextar, the Chithri. His species are natural analysts, and he's been studying Academy security systems as part of his coursework. Can they be trusted with Cub lives? They've been sitting with us every day for 3 weeks. They ask about the Cubs' well-being, bring them small gifts, help with their homework. If they were part of a conspiracy to hurt Zixtai and more death, they're the most dedicated long-term planners in galactic history. The logic was sound. More importantly, Kethvar had observed the interactions Sarah described. The daily breakfast gatherings had evolved into genuine friendships, with species barriers dissolving through shared experience and mutual curiosity. That evening, they arranged a seemingly casual meeting in one of the Academy's recreational spaces. The Cubs were happily engaged in a zero-gravity play area specifically designed for young beings. their laughter echoing through the vast chamber as they soared through complex obstacle courses with their new friends. Kethvar, Sarah, Lyra, and Kextar positioned themselves at a viewing table where their conversation would appear to be normal parental supervision. "We need your help," Sarah began without preamble. "Someone is trying to kill the cubs." Lyra's feathers immediately flattened against her skull, a sign of extreme alarm among her people. Kextar's mandibles clicked rapidly in the Chithari equivalent of profanity. "Evidence," Kextar demanded, his translated voice tight with controlled anger. Kethvar showed them the message from clan leader Vextai and described the failed assassination attempt from earlier that day. Both listeners absorbed the information with the focused intensity of beings trained in information analysis. "Political implications extend beyond Vorthak internal affairs," Lyra observed. "This could destabilize the entire galactic peace process." "Which is probably the point," Kextar added. "Question becomes, who benefits from renewed conflicts?" "Multiple candidates," Kethvar admitted. "But we need to identify the immediate threat before we can address the larger conspiracy." Lyra's head tilted thoughtfully. "Zephyrian information networks extend throughout the Academy. If non-standard personnel are operating here, my clan siblings will have noticed. Give me 6 hours." Chithari educational systems include detailed Academy infrastructure analysis, Kextar contributed. "I can map optimal security protocols and identify potential vulnerability points." "Also 6 hours. What do we do in the meantime?" Sarah asked. Kethvar studied the cubs as they played with innocent joy, unaware that their lives hung in the balance. "We maintain normal routines while implementing enhanced protective measures. And we prepare for the possibility that the next attempt will be more sophisticated than the first." The next 6 hours passed with nerve-wracking normalcy. Dinner, study time, evening recreational period, bedtime routines, all conducted under the appearance of routine, while Kethvar's senses remained hyper-alert for any sign of danger. The cubs sensed something was different, though they couldn't identify exactly what. They were more clingy than usual, staying closer to their guardians and asking frequent questions about Academy security procedures disguised as general curiosity. "Kethvar," Zixtai asked as he was settling her into bed, "are there bad people at the Academy?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask, little hunter?" "Everything feels prickly today, like when storm clouds gather before lightning strikes." Sarah smells worried. "And you've been using your hunting walk instead of your regular walk." Vorthak cubs, he remembered, were bred from predatory stock. Their instincts might be undeveloped, but they weren't absent. Of course they would sense the heightened tension. "There may be individuals here who do not wish us well," he said carefully. "But you are protected, Sarah, and I will not allow harm to come to you." Zixtai nodded solemnly. "Should more death, and I practice our emergency procedures?" Emergency procedures. Of course they had been taught emergency procedures. All Vorthak cubs learned basic survival skills from the time they could walk. He had been thinking of them as helpless younglings, but they were actually young predators with significant training. "Yes," he said, "practice would be wise, but quietly, and only when we are in secure spaces." When Lyra and Kextar returned with their intelligence reports, the picture they painted was both illuminating and terrifying. 7 non-academy personnel have been identified on campus over the past 4 days, Lyra reported, all using falsified credentials, all with military-grade concealment training. Zephyrian observers noted them because their movement patterns were too precise for civilian behavior. "Security vulnerabilities are extensive," Kextar added, producing a 3-dimensional hologram of the Academy structure. 47 potential infiltration routes, 12 high-probability assassination zones, and evidence of systematic compromise in the central security monitoring systems. Systematic compromise? Sarah leaned forward with sharp attention. "You mean this is an inside job?" "Partial inside coordination confirmed. Security protocols have been selectively disabled in specific zones and time periods. Someone with administrative access is facilitating the operation." The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Not only were professional killers stalking the cubs, but they had support from within the Academy's own administration. The institution he had grudgingly come to respect was harboring those who would murder children for political gain. "Recommendations?" he asked. Lyra and Kextar exchanged glances before Lyra answered. Extraction. Remove the cubs from the Academy environment entirely. Impossible, Kethvar replied immediately. Unknown individuals arrange for their placement here. Removing them could trigger the very political crisis the conspirators desire. We need a different solution. Then, we bring the fight to them, Sarah said quietly. We identify the conspirators, expose them, and eliminate the threat permanently. How? Sarah's smile was sharp and predatory. We use the cubs as bait. The suggestion sent every protective instinct in Kethvar's body into overdrive. Absolutely not. I will not risk their lives. We're not risking their lives, Sarah corrected. We're protecting them by forcing our enemies to reveal themselves. But we do it smart, with backup, and with the cubs completely safe throughout. Over the next hour, she outlined a plan that was audacious, dangerous, and completely brilliant. They would announce a special cultural presentation where the cubs would demonstrate traditional Vorthack hunting techniques to the Academy community. The event would be heavily publicized, ensuring that the conspirators would see it as the perfect opportunity for a public assassination that could be blamed on traditional species conflicts. But, instead of being victims, the cubs would be protected by a carefully coordinated security operation involving their growing network of student allies. The real targets would be the assassins themselves, who would be captured and interrogated to reveal the larger conspiracy. The cubs will never be in actual danger, Sarah insisted. We'll use holographic doubles for the public presentation, while the real cubs are safely hidden. But the conspirators won't know that until it's too late. It was risky. It required precise timing and coordination among species who had never worked together operationally. Most dangerously, it depended on their ability to predict and counter the actions of professional killers. But it also offered the possibility of ending the threat permanently while gathering the evidence needed to expose the larger conspiracy. How long do we have to prepare? Kethvar asked. The presentation is scheduled for 3 days from now, Sarah replied. Enough time to set up the operation, but not enough for the conspirators to develop counter-strategies once they learn about it. Kethvar looked around the table at the faces of beings he never could have imagined trusting with clan business. A human who fought for children that weren't her own species. A Zephyrian who used her people's information networks to protect potential prey. A Chithari who applied his analytical brilliance to safeguarding traditional enemies. 3 weeks ago, he would have called such cooperation impossible. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the galaxy. Very well, he said. We hunt.